However, counterintuitively, low tuition does not necessarily mean low total costs. And as you can see here, after taking grant aid into account, it is more affordable for a low-income Californian to attend a public university rather than a community college in the state. And this is not just the case in the Berkeley area, but around the entire state, unfortunately. While community colleges in California do have the lowest tuition and fees in the nation, when you include non-tuition costs, which comprise the majority of total college costs, these total college costs are much more similar. However, students at different segments do not receive the same levels of grant support. I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, and this is something you experience every day, unfortunately. But this means that our net costs, what we have to pay out of pocket, can differ significantly, with California community colleges consistently more expensive for low-income students than for our peers at public universities. Though I do want to note that college is not affordable for them either. There are severe challenges that our friends at CSU and UC and at private colleges face as well. But I do really want to highlight the disparity in grant aid that community college students get, and we'll talk more about that as the presentation moves along. So as you can see here, just to kind of put in perspective, we're looking at the average grant aid received by students at public colleges and universities in California. And you can see that, as I was saying, community college students get considerably less grant assistance, including from the state Cal Grant program, which we'll get into more depth about. It's also very important to underscore that these affordability challenges for our lowest income students have very real equity implications. The majority of Latino, Native American, and Black students have family incomes under $30,000 a year. And that's a group that has to spend about half or more of their income to cover college costs after available grant aid. This has many negative impacts on our underrepresented and vulnerable students, including increased incidence of basic needs insecurity and disproportionate debt burdens for our public university graduates. So the implications of insufficient need-based aid. And again, I'm aware that all of you experience this, so I bring it up more just to kind of summarize it, summarize what the current environment is. So number one, excessive work hours. And we know that research finds that working more than 15 to 20 hours a week can be detrimental to student success. We also see low rates of full-time attendance, and we know that students who are able to attend full-time are more likely to complete. And we're seeing folks borrowing to buy more time to study so they can work less, which is understandable. But we're also seeing that at public universities, students of color and low-income students are disproportionately more likely to borrow, which is very concerning. So looking a little bit more closely at these negative impacts on our students. And this is from a report that we've done over the last couple of years. The most recent is from July 2020, and it's called What College Costs for Low-Income Californians 2020. Happy to make sure afterward that folks have a link to this report. But as you can see here, at all of the community colleges and CSUs and UCs in our analysis, low-income students would need to work more than 15 hours a week to cover their out-of-pocket costs after grant aid. And at the community colleges in our analysis, students would need to work as many as 40 hours per week to cover college costs after available grant aid, which is very concerning. Students may also borrow, especially at public universities, and we find that lower income students and students of color are much more likely to do so. So for example, while about half of bachelor's degree graduates at CSU and UC borrow student loans, 2/3 of Black students at UC and 3/4 of Black graduates at CSU do. Now, you probably saw in the previous slide, I'll just pop back for a second, that the borrowing rates at community colleges in California are generally quite low. But we know that it's not because college is affordable. We know that instead many students are choosing to work. We saw that with the high rates of work in 2 slides ago. And so as a result of choosing to work to cover costs, we see the impact on enrollment. In fact, only a minority of our California community college students are able to take a full-time course load, which, as I mentioned earlier, is correlated with higher rates of student completion. And again, unfortunately, something all of us know all too well, COVID-19 has only exacerbated the many affordability challenges faced by students throughout our state. Before the crisis, 2/3 of students reported either the cost of college or balancing school and work responsibilities as major obstacles to their success. And just 2 months into the pandemic, a minority reported that they thought they would be able to afford basic expenses if the crisis persisted for 2 more months. We know it's unfortunately persisted much longer than that. I also, want to note the severe equity implications. The findings from a forthcoming TICAS analysis of a statewide survey that we conducted of California college students show that the pandemic has negatively impacted our underrepresented and most vulnerable students. For example, over half of Black and Latinx students report increased indicators of food insecurity, and half of Black students report missing a housing-related payment. When the pandemic hit last year, our Affordability Coalition, including SSCCC, issued recommendations on what the state could do to protect students' financial aid during the ongoing crisis. One of the positive steps that was taken last year was to provide emergency financial aid for undocumented students who were very, very unfortunately kept out from federal CARES dollars. We also last year had recommended that lawmakers could extend by 1 year the time period during which eligible applicants can receive a Cal Grant and extend lifetime award limits for students affected by withdrawals and non-completion due to COVID-19. So we're really excited that this year Assemblymember Cervantes has introduced AB 1185, which would add an additional year to meet state requirements for entitlement Cal Grants. This includes some provisions for the community college transfer entitlement, which would allow an additional year for students to get that transfer award. Under current statute, you have to enroll in a four-year university immediately following the year you're in a community college. We know many students have had to stop out. And so this would extend the time period during which community college transfer students could get that award. It also would extend the eligibility age cap by 1 year to 29. We're working with this office and we're hopeful that we could also potentially add the provision around extending the lifetime eligibility. And what I mean by that is students have up to 4 years of full-time eligibility for Cal Grants. Now, if a student had to drop out in the middle of a term because of COVID, they got sick, a family member got sick, they lost their job, and they had been getting a Cal Grant that term would count against the total 4 years they can get the Cal Grant for. And we don't think that it should. We think that should be restored. So we're hopeful to see that perhaps that provision will be added as well. And perhaps most importantly, we all know that the state needs to address the structural issues that have long plagued the Cal Grant program and negatively impacted California community college students in particular. Before I get into the details of these problems and the proposed solutions, just want to take a quick look at the current program structure. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with it. I know it's also pretty complicated and wonky, so I'll just take 30 seconds to go over the key parameters. So there are 2 eligibility pools. If you are a recent high school graduate and you apply by the March 2nd deadline, assuming you meet basic eligibility, income, and GPA criteria, you are entitled to a Cal Grant and you will get one. But let's say you went to an under-resourced high school and nobody told you about the deadline, or for many reasons you did not go straight from high school to college, you do not get an entitlement award and you have to compete for a very limited number of awards. There also is Cal Grant A and Cal Grant B. And community college students only get Cal Grant B because our tuition and fees at community colleges are already covered by the California College Promise Grant if we're lower middle income. The amount of Cal Grant that a student gets depends on where they attend. And community college students get by far the smallest Cal Grant. They get, like I said, the Cal Grant B Access Award to help cover non-tuition costs. I should note that there are a small number of Cal Grant C awards for career technical education. There are just under 8,000 that are awarded every year. So, looking more deeply into the structural issues with the Cal Grant program that are perpetuating the inequities we've been seeing. Here, what we're looking at here is the applicant pool for the competitive Cal Grant. And as I mentioned, applicants who are more than 1 year out of high school must compete for a very limited number of awards. And every year there are literally hundreds of thousands of applicants who don't get one simply because not enough are available. The vast majority of these eligible applicants are attending our community colleges, which serve most of the state's low-income students and students of color. So as you can see here in the most recent academic year, there were just 41,000 awards available for over 300 eligible applicants. Now, back when the modern version of the Cal Grant program was created about 20 years ago, there was one competitive Cal Grant award available for every 4 applicants. And today it's 1 in 8. This is, while that's double the amount in the past 20 years, I do want to note that it is a substantial improvement compared to recent years where the odds were actually about 1 in 17. So progress has been made in recent years, in great part due to the advocacy of statewide student leaders like SSCCC, but we're still very far from where we need to be. Additionally, for those who are able to receive a Cal Grant award, the Access Award, and again, this is the only type of Cal Grant that our community college students get, and which helps pay for non-tuition costs, has dramatically lost value. Today, it is worth less than $2,000, and we know that non-tuition costs for students across all types of colleges, including community colleges, can exceed $20,000 a year. To put it in context, this award used to cover 16% of non-tuition costs 20 years ago, and today it covers 9% as it continues to decline, because it does not increase automatically each year like the Cal Grant that covers statewide tuition and fees does. So in summary, the key structural problems within the current Cal Grant program. We know that it does well helping recent high school graduates with tuition costs, but not nearly as well with older students and non-tuition college costs. And as we have been talking about, affordability challenges impact student debt, completion, time to degree, and can contribute significantly to equity gaps. So Cal Grant reform, that's something that I know many of us are very intimately involved in and excited about the prospect of. So I wanted to first start by talking a little bit about what it looked like prior to the pandemic. Before COVID-19 and its attendant recession hit last spring, California was well on its way to reforming the Cal Grant program. There was growing consensus on a California pledge where state grants or grants in general would cover remaining financial need after a reasonable student contribution. And there was legislation introduced on both the Assembly and Senate sides. Of course, when the pandemic hit, our advocacy efforts then pivoted to how we can help support students during the pandemic, which we continue to work on, as we were just talking about. However, Cal Grant reform efforts were recently revived when the California State Legislature directed CSAC to revisit reform without any additional funds. So key there is that prior to the pandemic, we were able to look at reform with the idea of additional investments, and now it is basically being tasked with no additional new funds. So as the pandemic continues, CSAC has moved forward with a revised Cal Grant modernization proposal. And again, the stated goal is to remove barriers to its receipt. We know age and time out of high school are huge barriers for so many of our students. And also to move closer to a total cost of attendance model where we're doing a much better job covering critical non-tuition costs. CSAC's proposal is now in AB 1456, which has been introduced by Assembly members Medina and McCarty, as well as principal co-author Senator Leyva. And all three of them were leaders in previous years when they had introduced the initial legislation in both the Senate and the Assembly prior to the pandemic. So let's take a look at what this proposed reform, what this bill entails. For Cal Grant 2 is for community college students, and Cal Grant 4 would be for students at four-year institutions. I'm sure all of us are most interested in how it would impact community college students. And we know that there would you would have to have an expected family contribution of 0. And that is a formula that is calculated when you fill out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And it would remove GPA and age and time out of high school barriers. There would be an access award like there is now, and it would be reduced by about $400 to $1,250 to help pay for non-tuition costs. There also would be a Cal Grant 4, as I mentioned, for four-year students that would be open to Pell Grant eligible EFCs, so not just 0, but higher. Again, no age restrictions, and it would cover statewide tuition and fees in a specified amount at private institutions as it does today. There's also talking about the stipend for students with dependent children. Cal Grant 2 students, if you're at a community college and you have a dependent child or children, you would get a dependent children's stipend instead of the Cal Grant 2. It would be a little bit higher. Or if you're at a four-year institution, you would get the tuition award and this additional stipend on top of it. So does this reform, proposed reform, solve for the inequities we've long seen in the program? The current proposal would indeed create an entitlement for California community college students, which is great. We know so many are left out every year, and it's incredibly important to be able to provide awards to everyone who is eligible. But unfortunately, as currently written, it does not do a better job of covering non-tuition costs. In fact, by decreasing the maximum amount to $1,250, it actually moves away from a total cost of attendance model. As far as the Cal Grant 4 for students at four-year institutions, we have some concerns about the expectation that institutions will provide assistance to low-income students to help pay for non-tuition costs. We appreciate that there is that expectation there, but want to make sure that there's more teeth to it that would actually ensure that institutions do so. So, TICAS and several of our partners have taken a support if amended position on AB 1456 because we'd really like to see a few improvements to the bill. We are really excited about it. We are heartened by the fact that so many in the Capitol are interested in finally addressing these issues. And in terms of our community college students, the most important thing to us is, number one, we really feel strongly that we can't cut the current access award amount. We know how much it's already decreased over the decades, and it certainly cannot decrease anymore. I wish I had a crystal ball to say whether I think that we're going to be able to keep it at this amount, but what I will say is I feel really hopeful. Certainly, the state financial picture is a lot better than we thought it would be. I do think there's increased appetite to make sure that we don't cut the award. So I'm feeling really hopeful about it. We also, and the second point, our support is not contingent upon, but I want to highlight it because I think it's important. We also suggest that they strengthen the growth factor. So what I mean by that is there's never been any way that the access award has grown naturally over time. For example, that at the CSU and the UC, the Cal Grant award amount grows as statewide tuition grows. Now, the AB 1456 would, for the first time, include a growth factor by saying, okay, the access award should grow in line with inflation. And that's great. But we think what would be even better would be having it grow in line with actual changes in non-tuition costs. So just to put that all in perspective, as I'd mentioned, the access award covered 16% of non-tuition costs 20 years ago. Today it covers 9%. If it had kept pace with inflation or the California Consumer Price Index, it would be covering 13% today. So it would still have declined, but much more slowly. And we think that if you're able to actually tie it to non-tuition costs, that would, you could do that because institutions have to provide CSAC with their student budgets every year, and that helps CSAC determine unmet need and whether or not students are eligible for Cal Grants. So they perhaps could use the same student budgets that are submitted to determine kind of an average California change in non-tuition costs. We also want to make sure that the state has an articulated goal to reach equal income thresholds over time. And so what I mean by that is that currently the Cal Grant 2, you'd have to be among the lowest income. It would have to be your EFC is 0, whereas for students at 4 years, your EFC could be as high as about 6,000. And so just, to make sure that we don't continue to codify these disparities between community colleges and other segments, we'd love to see the bill to include some language that says, by X year, the thresholds will have reached equal thresholds. And then for 4-year students, we also want to make sure that, we're really pleased that the bill includes language around greater transparency from institutions on how they use their institutional financial aid. And we want to make sure that there's more teeth in ensuring that state aid supplements and does not replace institutional aid, that aid is prioritized for non-tuition costs for the most low-income students, and that we can aim to get students' unmet need down to a manageable level, which we have, basically defined as students should not have to pay more out of pocket than what they could earn working no more than 15 hours a week at minimum wage during the school year. So I hope, all of that was a helpful overview of, the college affordability landscape in California, opportunities that we have today to help our students during the ongoing pandemic and recession, and opportunities we have to finally reform the Cal Grant program. We would certainly not be here today if it weren't for all of the tremendous work and efforts of all of you and your colleagues at CSSA, UCSA. So, as an advocacy organization and the leader of Californians for College Affordability Coalition, we'd love to continue to keep working together to make sure that student stories are heard, that we actually can make movement, that we can continue to make movement on strengthening college affordability and overall financial aid reform. Up here, I've listed some of the ways in which we can continue to work together, including reaching out to key policymakers, writing letters to college papers and local papers, writing letters to policymakers, testifying at legislative and budget hearings, spreading the word through social media. And I just wanted to share some of the ways in which TCAS and SSCCC has collaborated over the years. We've done everything from General Assembly resolutions on college affordability to postcard campaigns. This one you'll see here about community college students are California's future. A couple of years back, we partnered, students delivered more than 2,000 postcards to the Capitol. There was an article in the Huffington Post, and Speaker Rendon actually spoke to the stories on the back of these postcards that students shared, saying this is why we need more competitive awards. So it was really, really terrific. And we did see an increase in competitive awards. And most recently, we worked together with SSCCC leadership on a joint letter to provide to urge there to be emergency financial aid for California community college students without unnecessary barriers. So in the original proposal, there might have to be some difficult verification. Students would have to prove that they'd worked a certain amount of time. We were able to work together to advocate for a much more student-friendly, student-focused financial emergency aid program, which was signed as part of an early action package. And we know is really important to helping all of our students afford costs that are coming with the emergencies out of the current crisis. So with that, I just want to thank you all so much for having me here today. It's always one of my favorite things to work with awesome leaders like all of you. I know I've thrown out quite a bit of information, so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I'm happy to go back to any previous slides if you want to talk more in depth about them.